The night my wife looked me in the eyes and said, "I don't owe you intimacy," I knew something inside me had shattered. It wasn't just the words. It was the weight behind them. The coldness that pierced deeper than any argument we'd had before. For years, I had tried to be the husband I thought she needed. Loving, attentive, caring. But somehow, it was never enough. She had changed. Or maybe it was me who had failed to see it. The emotional distance had grown so wide that I barely recognized the woman I had once fallen in love with. It was more than just the absence of touch. It was the absence of any connection at all. And when those words left her lips, I realized how far we had fallen. But before we dive deeper into this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the twists and turns that follow. In the days that followed that devastating night, I began to look at everything differently. The house, once a symbol of the life we had built together, now felt like a prison. Every corner reminded me of what had been and what could have been. The photos on the walls, the empty space beside me at dinner. These things no longer felt comforting. They felt like reminders of a life I couldn't grasp anymore. But I couldn't just sit around and wallow in my misery. I had to make a change. It wasn't going to be easy, but I needed to reclaim myself. I wasn't the man I had been when I married her. I wasn't the man who had allowed his identity to revolve around someone who no longer cared for him the way he deserved. It started with small steps, working out, eating better, sleeping better. But as I began to change physically, I noticed something inside me changing too. There was a shift in my mindset. I realized that I had been living my life for her, constantly trying to please her, to win back what we had lost. But why? Why had I put my entire existence on hold for someone who seemed indifferent to my pain? And then, as the days passed, I began to see the effects of my transformation. I wasn't doing this for her anymore. I wasn't trying to win her affection or attention. No, I was doing this for me. And as my confidence grew, so did the distance between us. The more I pulled away, the more she seemed to notice. It was as if she hadn't even realized how distant we had become until she saw me walking away from her. It wasn't long before I noticed the change in her. She started paying attention to me again in ways she hadn't in months. She'd steal glances when I walked into the room, watch me with an intensity I hadn't felt in a long time. I could tell she was curious, maybe even surprised by the new version of myself I was becoming. And that's when the doubts started creeping in. Doubts about the marriage, about her, about me. What did this mean? Was she truly interested in me again? Or was this just her way of controlling the situation? One night after dinner, she approached me. Her eyes, which had once been cold and distant, were now filled with an unfamiliar intensity. She spoke in a low, almost nervous voice, asking me how I had changed so drastically. I didn't answer her directly. Instead, I stood up, walked to the window, and stared outside. My mind was racing. Should I tell her the truth? Should I let her know how deeply her betrayal had cut me? And that's when the truth came to light. I had already started suspecting that something wasn't right. The late nights, the hidden phone conversations, the strange behavior, it all pointed to something more. But it wasn't until that moment that I realized what had really been going on. I confronted her not with the rage I had expected, but with a calm clarity. She didn't deny it at first. Instead, she tried to justify her actions. She claimed that I hadn't been there for her emotionally, that I had withdrawn long before she had. But that wasn't the whole truth. She wasn't just dissatisfied. She had crossed a line, one that no apology could undo. She had betrayed me. And the person she had been with wasn't just some random affair. No, it was someone I knew, someone from our past. A close friend, a man I had trusted. The man she had been spending time with wasn't just an outsider. He was a part of our world, and that betrayal stung even more. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt my world collapse in on itself, and for a moment I wasn't sure how I would ever recover. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to allow this woman, this person who had once meant everything to me, to tear me apart. So, I did what I had to do. I started to let go. I stopped waiting for her to change, to apologize, to make things right. I stopped holding on to a dream that no longer existed. The more I distanced myself emotionally, the more I saw her true colors. She wasn't just a woman who had made a mistake. She was someone who had stopped caring about me, about us, a long time ago. And that realization made everything so much clearer. But even then, things didn't go as planned. The more I pulled away, the more she seemed desperate to hold on. She started showing up at my work, sending me texts, doing whatever she could to reassert control. But it wasn't the kind of attention I wanted. It was the kind of attention that came from guilt, from fear of losing me, from a realization that the comfortable life she had built was slipping away. And that's when I made a decision. A decision to not only walk away, but to embrace the freedom I had long denied myself. I started making plans for my future, without her in it. And as time passed, I realized something extraordinary. I had been living in the shadow of our past, holding on to memories and hopes that no longer served me. But now, I was free. Free to rebuild, free to rediscover who I was before the marriage, before the betrayal, before everything that had kept me chained.